What's up, guys? Welcome back. It's PB&J. I'm back with Brian and Patrick, and we have our first official comic book centric episode. Now, this one is the topic we're gonna go over is it's a big one. It's more about collecting comics and what makes a comic valuable. If you're kind of looking to invest and make some money, and the reason why we came up on the subject is that just so happens a couple months ago, my cousin was telling me that his friend was starting to collect comics, and he wanted to make money off of them. And so I was like, what comics is he buying? Is he researching? And he said that no, literally, his buddy was walking in the comic shops, finding the pretty comics that he thought looked cool, and he was buying them, bagging them up, and putting them away.
Yeah, that's a
And
good way to do it.
yeah, and I was like, oh my God, are you serious? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, dude, that is so wrong. I was like, he's throwing darts at a dartboard and he's hoping beyond hope that one of them hits. But since I don't know what he's buying, I couldn't really give oh, that's a good idea. I'm assuming that he's just buying he sees the Superman, oh, I'll buy that. He probably saw like a Captain Marvel. Oh, I just saw her movie. I'll buy that one. So it was a funny story. I gave my cousin some tips. I was like, he should look for this and this, and then, and he was trying to buy it on the cheap, and I was like, no, he's gonna have to spend some money. Kind of like with everything, right? You hear the saying, if you want to make money, you gotta spend money. So anyway, I told this story to Brian and Patrick, and we were kind of laughing about it, but we kind of realized that people really don't know who aren't in the comic book world. They don't know what to look for. This guy doesn't know anything about comics, probably just watched the Avengers movies. So we decided, we should run down a little list of what to look for. And Patrick, since he's our eBay master and he's the guy who's super onto buying comics that are valuable and actually bring back a return for him. He prepared a little list, and so I'm gonna throw it over to Patrick, and I'm gonna let him get started and let you guys know what his steps of buying comics are. So what's up, dude?
Yeah. So,
Hey, what's up, man?
hey, sorry to interrupt you really quick. Like, I just want to add, like, a lot of people who are new into collecting comics, like, they get excited after watching a movie about a comic book character, and then they'll go out to the comic book store and they'll look for like whatever it is number one. So John, you could, I don't know if this is true or not, but like, I think whenever movie, a character comes out, they'll start a new series, right? Like Marvel or DC, a number one for, let's say, Deadpool, and a spin off, like a separate story. I think it's to get people who are new to it to start reading it. But if you want to go in as a collector, you might see that and you don't know anything. You're going to think that that's like the first comic, right? So you buy that up and then you think, thinking there's value, but there's not. So, so
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I didn't think about that, but it's true. And Marvel actually became kind of notorious, kind of infamous for doing this lately. And by lately, I mean within the last 10, 15, 20 years. What they would do is every couple years, they would end a comic and to get a sales boost. So after, say, the comic runs for 25, 40, 50 issues, and they'll restart at the new issue one. And that's just to get a short-term bump, because a lot of people they do get general collectors that come in and go, oh, a new number one, and then they get a bump for that month. And Marvel took a lot of heat for that because there's no reason to do it. It's just like, comic runs for 4 years, bam, restart it. And it's like, why? Story-wise, there's no reason to. And it kind of upset people because you had these really long-running comics, like Incredible Hulk, ran for like, I think it hit 500 issues, and then they restarted it randomly to issue one. And then ever since then, they've done it like 2 or 3 more times. And yeah, that's kind of it's a good point you brought that up. It's fool's gold. It's fool's gold. You see number one, you buy it, and you're like, oh man, this is gonna be worth a lot of money. It's an issue one, but it's nothing. The only issue one that you should concern yourself with is Incredible Hulk number one from 1962, I think. So yeah, that's actually a good. It's a tricky thing that Marvel did. DC has been better about it. Really, it was when the New 52 came in 2011. They did the mass reboot with the new issue number ones, and they've kept it pretty much since then. They haven't rebooted them since. So it's kind of it's mainly a Marvel thing that got kind of annoying. So yeah, that's actually a good point. There's a lot of number ones out there that people might think are worth money and they're not. They're just because it has a number one on it doesn't mean it. You really have to do your research on that one.
That makes sense. Yep.
So I'm sure Patrick, you can probably get more into that with your steps.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So we'll talk about what makes a comic valuable, right, guys?
Yep.
Well, the answer is the law of supply and demand. That's it. Let's move on to the next topic. I'm just playing. No.
It sounds like we're sitting in the economics class or something right
now. No, seriously. The law of supply and demand really does play a part in the value of comics, but that's really just too basic of an explanation. I think from experience, there are really some key elements that have to work together in order to make a comic valuable. And throughout my collecting career, I've applied all of these principles all of the time, unless I just wanted to buy a cover that I liked or some nostalgic comic book like George of the Jungle #1, just because it reminded me of my childhood, or He-Man, or what? I've got Thundercats too, but that's a different topic. So let's go over the key elements that I think that you need in order to have to make a comic book valuable. And these aren't in any particular order, by the way. The first one would be availability is really one of the key elements. So is that comic rare, or are they common, or somewhere in between? Most comics are probably going to be somewhere in between. But the more rare that comic is, it has a better chance of being valuable. But the big question is, what actually makes a comic rare? What do you guys think? Let me know.
Oh, the big one would be low print run, right? An initial print run that's small. For example, the big modern comic is Walking Dead issue 1, which only printed, I think you said 7,300.
Yeah, it's 7,300 for that.
That's it, man. And when I looked into it, I didn't think it was that low. I thought it was more like 20. And 7,000 comics of issue 1 after that show became such a monster hit. That's nothing. That's so rare. So I mean, we're talking about supply and demand. There you go. You have which at the time was the biggest show in the world, and then you had this tiny minuscule 7,000 copies. So that's the big one. Low print runs I think that's probably the number one cause for rarity.
Right. And that comic is pretty expensive, especially for a modern age book.
Yeah.
But that's not the only reason that comic books are rare. There's another one. Some comics have been recalled or have errors. Like there's that comic book in, what was it, what did you say, 1999? The Elseworld.
Elseworlds, yeah, the 80-page giant.
Yeah, so why don't you tell our listeners and viewers about that one?
Yeah, there was a comic called the DC Elseworlds 80-page giant, which came out in 1999, 2000, around there. And it was a collection of short stories, and it was no big deal. It was just an annual whatever, just a random comic that they were going to put out. But there's a story in there called Superman's Babysitter. And in that story, it was kind of like that. It's kind of like that little short from Pixar, the Jack, where the babysitter's trying to, Jack's powers come up, and the babysitter's, right. Yeah, it's basically like that, but they did it, a few years earlier. But there was a couple of sensitive points in there. One, the baby Superman ends up in a microwave, and it doesn't do anything to him because he's Superman. And the other thing is that he gets hungry and he picks up a cow and he drinks milk straight from the udders. And once the comic got published, DC kind of was like, they kind of backed off and they thought, those little story points are a little too risque. They didn't want those getting out, so they stopped the release. But a few hundred made it to Europe. And so you had this comic that, with the print run insanely low, just a few hundred, got out there. And of course, the collectors jumped all over it. So the price for that one immediately skyrocketed. And it's just an 80-page annual, like, goofy comic. It meant nothing. But because the rarity because of the rarity of it, it drove the price up, and it's still high because it's there's just not that many. You just can't get them.
Right. So now we've got for availability, we've got low print run, and we've got recalled or has particular errors in it. But there's something else too. Like some comics have actually had a decent print run, but because somehow they're either lost or thrown away or damaged, they became rare. So I have a perfect example for you guys. Let's take Action Comics #1 from 1938. A lot of you probably know this is the first appearance of Superman, which is the most expensive and most sought after book in history. That is the one. That's the major one. But I don't know if many people know this, but it had a print run of about 200,000. That's not rare. That's actually pretty common.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. However, after all of these years since 1938, there's between 50 and 100 copies left. So from being a common print, it became rare because so many have been lost and damaged. So those are basically the availability issue of making a comic rare. A low print run, a comic that's been recalled or has errors, and or if it's an older comic and they've been lost or damaged and there are hardly any left.
Yeah, I think that actually sets up the next step would be the age of the comic, right? Like if a comic is old, most likely it's rare, therefore the value is going to be high. Superman was 1939, right? And Batman
38.
38, yeah. And then Detective Comics 27 with Batman was 1940, and then Wonder Woman 1941. So these comics are pushing 100 years old, and there just aren't going to be that many. They're just so old. And it's not just these ones with the big name characters, but if you look at like comics like Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, those are worth a lot, right?
Oh, they are.
Yeah, because they're all in the 40s, and they're just not that many because of time. They, like Patrick said, they got destroyed, they got damaged. People just leave them in their right. They leave them in their attic, and they don't take care of them, and then they're just they're trash.
They used them for insulation in a house. Did you hear about that one contractor that bought a house, broke into the walls, and he found an Action #1 in the wall and sold it? That's crazy. That's ridiculous right there.
That's the jackpot, dude. That is jackpot.
Comic collector's dream right there. But the age makes it even more so rare that out of the Action Comics, out of the 100 that are left, give or take 100, there are only like 3 near mint copies, right? 2 are slabbed and one of them is unslabbed. So how rare is that? Now compare that to which comic were we talking about earlier? Walking Dead. There's probably at least 1,000 near mint or more of the 7,300. So yes, the comic is rare because there was only 7,300 printed, but near mint copies there's like over 1,000. And now you take Action Comics #1, and there's only 3 in the whole world that are near mint.
And isn't like Detective Comics? Isn't there only like 15 or something like that? Like
I don't know the exact number of Detective, but that one is pretty rare also. Just like the what is it? All-Star Comics #8, the first Wonder Woman.
Right. Yeah, they're just not that many.
Yeah. So let's go over to the next element that requires a requirement for a comic book to be valuable. It would be popularity. So if the book or the character in the book becomes popular, like the blue chip comics, like Action Comics, Detective Comics, Amazing Fantasy, people will want it. Because if somebody doesn't want the comic and it's not popular, it's probably not going to be worth that much. If the demand goes up on something, the value generally increases also. Now, you guys got to be careful because sometimes the anticipation or hype will temporarily cause the value of a book to increase.
Yeah. Yep.
But once the hype dies, so might the value. Like Showcase 22, so the first Hal Jordan, and Green Lantern #1, the prices on those books actually skyrocketed just before the Green Lantern movie came out. But because it wasn't done too well, those prices dropped right after the movie hit. I was kind of annoyed at that because I have one of those copies.
Did it drop back to what it was, or did it drop below that because the movie? that bad.
No, it dropped to back to what it was, but you're looking at like the comic doubled, because of the hype before the movie came out. And then I saw the movie myself, and I'm like, well, that's not good for this comic, and it did drop back down again. So yeah, I'm sure people bought it at like 4,500, and it probably dropped down to 2,500. So I'm sure some people were really annoyed because they assumed that it was going to skyrocket and continue that value, but it didn't. It just dropped.
And sticking with this with hype and being careful with hype, Brian, you told a story the other day about how in the 90s you and your brother bought a bunch of like the Image comics,
Right.
like Youngblood and what did you get, like Spawn, Savage Dragon?
Yep. And the Mac. There's a few other ones that I have too. But
Yeah,
like those.
yeah. I remember that was the early 90s, and the hype on Image was so high that all these comics came out. Savage Dragon, Youngblood, Wildcat, Spawn, and just drove the price. I remember those comics being there were hundreds of dollars at one point. Shadowhawk, um, and not only Image but Valiant Comics too. I don't know if you guys remember Valiant Comics, and that was like Man of War, Exo Man of War, Magnus Robot Fighter,
Oh yeah, I remember
Turok.
those.
Yeah, so those were like, I mean, in the early 90s, those were just worth a ton of money. And then they started doing like the chrome covers. Did you get any of the chrome covers, Brian?
I did, yeah.
Yeah,
The foil
the foil
covers, and
covers.
all
Yeah,
that stuff.
yeah, and they were, and so the hype was just huge. But then after a few years, once the hype died, and people realized these comics actually weren't very good to read, those values just in the dump. They're worth toilet paper now. I remember just by luck, I had the first Cable. Just by luck, I got it as a birthday present as a kid. And I remember watching the value on that just jump. Rob Liefeld, right? He was at the peak of his powers, and the value went to like 250. And then over the years, I kept checking, and it's just down, 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 down. And it's still worth a little bit. But yeah, that initial hype, you have to be careful for if you're going to spend money. You don't want to do. I know people who bought, like, remember Lady Death?
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a leather bound cover. It was leather, real leather, super rare, and it was like $150 or something. It's like it's I mean, it's still worth a little bit, but not that much.
Well, what about the Ultimate Spider-Mans? Remember, like Ultimate Spider-Man White? That was selling for $2,000.
Yep. Yeah, because those are the new. Oh, what's the Ultimates? The Ultimates are so cool. Ultimate Spider-Man's so good. Look at this variant. And then now, you fast forward 20 years later, and the Ultimate comics aren't even around anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that will bring us to our next one, which is the modern comics, right?
Right. Right.
Sorry, it's like the modern comics. Starting in the 90s, there was so much supply. Talk about supply and demand. They overprinted these comics. That's why the value is so low. You can go get Spawn right now. Spawn issue 1. You can go get it right now for $20. So in order to return a value, if you're going to get a modern comic, the grading on the comics have to be so high, right? Right, Patrick. Like, what would you say it needed to be?
Oh, for modern age comics, you probably, if you want it for investment purposes, not just collecting, but investment purposes, you probably need a 9.8. Anything 1985 on, they're so common, you need 9.8s. And you can definitely see it if you go onto eBay. You notice the big jump between a 9.6 and a 9.8. I don't even have it. I have like one 9.6. Most of mine are my good ones that I like. They're like 9.2, 9.4 highest. That's it.
Yeah, like I mean, that's almost perfect. Like they have to be printed like immediately slabbed to get a 9.8. That's so hard to get. So, I mean, like we were talking earlier, like unless you got lucky and you got Walking Dead issue 1, unless you hit the jackpot on that one. I mean, what do you think too? Like Venom, Amazing Spider-Man 300. That's probably
yeah.
like those two are probably Unless you can think of another one. I think those are two modern comics with the most that went up in value the highest.
Yeah, definitely the first Venom, Amazing Spider-Man 300. But even those, if you can get those on 9.8, those are very expensive comics.
Yeah. So other than that, the modern era is hard. It's so hard to get value on those. There's a couple, there are a couple that are going up in value, but the Deadpool, like all his miniseries and stuff from the 90s, but it took 20 years for a profit to start coming in. So if you're coming in, you want to buy some comics that you think are get invested on, you're gonna have to go pre-modern. You're gonna have to go at least Silver Age. That's what I think. What do you think, Patrick?
Yeah, you can. I mean, like I said, if you first of all, it's difficult to get premium comics in Silver Age and Golden Age that are near mint. Those are so expensive; they're out of most people's price ranges. So if you're starting out and you want to collect something, you might want to just collect the modern age comics and just get a higher grade. And we're going to go into one of those key elements a little bit later. There's one more that'll help you guys determine if a comic could potentially be worth something later. I'm not giving out any hints of what the key element is, but potentially it might be there. So what we're talking about right now is the key element is really condition, and there are a couple of variables in the condition. So it's quality. Is it a restored comic? Is the comic book complete? If it's unrestored, it basically means that it was unaltered. So restored comics are altered to enhance the appearance to get a better grade. The better the comic condition is, the more expensive it will be. For example, let's take Action Comics again. I know I keep using Action Comics, but it's a great comic to illustrate these
That's
key elements.
that's the big one. So
Yeah, in 2014, there was a near mint copy that sold for over $3 million, and that was in 2014. Now, in 2018, so the prices should be going up, a 2.0 sold for 167,000. So, see the difference there? In 2014, a near mint one sold for over $3 million. And a 2.0, you're only going to get 167. I know that sounds like a lot of money, but consider the comic. So the quality has a lot to do with the value of a book. And that's what we were talking about. If you want a modern age comic book, if you don't have the highest grade possible, yes, the price of the comic will increase, but not to the extent if it's an actual perfect comic book like a 9.8. So that would be the difference. As far as restoration goes, what do you guys think about restoration? Do you guys care if a comic book is restored for your personal collections? I don't like restored comics. I want a comic that is unrestored. I made a mistake when I was first collecting comics. I bought an X-Men 95, and it had a date on it. So, I mean, I was younger. I was a teenager. And so I took some whiteout and I colored the date on the cover with the whiteout, clearly not knowing that would be considered restoration. So, because I hated seeing it. It bothered me so much that like 20 years later, I bought like a 9.4 of the same comic book. But I just don't like restoration. Now, if you think about it though, like I like old cars too. Like I like Mustangs. And I don't mind having a restored Mustang, but for some reason in comic books, I just want them unrestored. Even if there are marks on it now, I don't even really mind. But once the comic book is restored, I don't like it. And you can actually see the price difference. The value actually decreases when a comic book is restored, even if it looks better. So if you get a comic book that's graded at a 9.2, but it's restored, an 8.0 comic that's unrestored is going to be a lot more valuable than that 9.2 that is restored. There are multiple examples of that across the board on basically every comic book.
yeah, I think when you restore it, I think it's almost like you're killing the history of the book. Like it got its damage over time, and then you're restoring it, and it's like, oh, that's fake. That's not real. That's not what it looks like. It's like,
Exactly.
you're killing the character of the comic, I guess. So yeah, I stay away. I stay away from restored. If it's restored, I don't want it.
What about you, Brian? What do you think?
Yeah, like as a investor, I would not. I would stay away from restored comics. But if I really wanted to have a issue of something that I really want but I couldn't afford, then I would get that just to have it. But I wouldn't consider that as an investment. Because like at this point, if you're going to consider it, if you're investing in comics, you need to treat it like an art piece, right? Like it can't be like altered or changed in any way because then that's not original anymore. Even if it's just like one corner of one page, it's you're altering it, and even if you're like keeping the pages like fresher to or restore the color in the book, it's not the same anymore. It's not original, like John said. So you're not like getting like you're not letting it age naturally. But then that's what people look for, right? Like they want the reason why those books are graded high is because it's naturally still in a very good condition,
Right.
and that's what gives its value. It's not that it's been restored back to like a good condition book.
Okay, well, I got this question for you guys then. Since the key element we're talking about is condition, quality, and restoration, I really don't like I said, I don't like writing on a book. So what about a signature? This, I think, is subjective, right? I think we talked about this a little bit last time. I don't like signatures on my book. I want the book clean. But John, you like signatures, right?
Yeah, I used to when I used to go to Comic-Con when I was younger. Man, I stood in line and I got hundreds of comics autographed. I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. And this was before Comic-Con really blew up and became Comic-Con. So I did it for like 10 years probably, maybe a little bit more. I would take a big old stack of like the stuff I wanted to get signed. I'd find out who was going to be there and what time they're going to sign, and man, I got tons of them signed. But yeah, as I got and I was just a kid, so I didn't know. But when I was a kid, I thought, oh man, the artist signed it, and now it's more valuable, and I gotta be careful with it. But then as I got older, I, just doing research and stuff, I found out that it's totally subjective. It's some people don't like it, like Patrick. Some people hate it if they personalize the signature. If they said like if they wrote like to John, signed, Jim Lee, then someone named Brian isn't gonna want the comic that says to John on it. So
No, I agree with that totally. But here's the weird thing is like for me, I think it brings the value lower. But if you look at the sales, like with Stan Lee's signature on an Amazing Fantasy, the price is above. So if you had like an 8.0 of an Amazing Fantasy that had Stan Lee's signature on it, I've been noticing that it actually does sell more than when it doesn't have his signature on it. But me as a collector, I wouldn't pay as much because I just don't like it on there.
yeah, and I think too. I think I don't even think it affects the like the Overstreet price guide. I don't think it affects it at all. It's just a
Right.
signature. It doesn't do anything unless you can get it a certificate of authenticity. Unless you can get one of those, like when you get it graded, and I think you said it's a yellow color, right? When they grade it, and it's yellow.
It is. That's through CGC, but I mean that's a whole other topic that we got to save for
Yeah,
another episode. But what I understand is that CGC, they will only give it a yellow label if they're there to witness it.
yeah,
They don't
yeah,
verify signatures. So if you come in with your comic book signed by Stan Lee, whether it is from Stan Lee or not, they're not going to certify it, giving it a yellow label. They will not. They'll just say there's some writing on the cover because they didn't see it.
yeah. So,
Now the other companies will, like I think CBCS and PGX, they will verify signatures, but CGC doesn't.
yeah, and yeah. So I was gonna say that if you're looking to invest and you want to bring up the value of your comic, it's probably better off. You're probably better off not getting the signature. If you're looking to invest it and sell it later at max value, it's probably safer just to not do it. Just slab it and keep it that way. Like you said, if CGC is someone is actually there to see the signature, like, but that's so hard. When are you gonna do that? When are you gonna
Right.
go somewhere and a guy signing and you're gonna have a CGC guy there too at the same time? It's just not gonna happen. So if you are investing purely for financial reasons to maximize it, don't get the signature.
Yeah.
If you just think it's cool and you want them for yourself, then go for it. Like I thought it was just super cool to have all these signatures. It doesn't hurt the value. It doesn't raise it either, though. So it's purely a subjective thing for the collector. That's pretty much it.
Now, also with the condition of the comic, if there's a piece missing out of the comic, that's really bad. Like I know back in the day, Marvel wanted you to cut out the Marvel stamp and you could put it
Oh
in a
yeah,
book.
yeah,
The price goes way down.
way down.
Like on Hulk 181. I mean, yeah, Hulk 181, the first Wolverine. Marvel stamps are cut out of those pretty routinely. They were cut out, and
Yeah.
price is less than half because it's not a complete comic anymore. And if there's a piece cut out and it affects the story, that's even worse. You just don't want pieces of comics out. So if you're to buy a comic book, um, look through it. Don't just judge. Don't judge the book by the cover. You have to look through it. I actually went to Comic Con. I don't know. This is like 8 or 9 or 10 years ago, something like that. And I was just interested in an Amazing Fantasy 15. And I ever heard one of the dealers in a conversation with the patron because he just bought that Amazing Fantasy, and what I overheard was about half an hour before he said, "Do you remember me? I just bought this comic from you," and I think he paid like I don't know, at the time it was like $1,800 for Amazing Fantasy. It was probably more than 10 years ago. It was probably like 15 years ago, and he said there are pieces missing. You didn't tell me this, but I looked through it and I want my money back. And the guy's all, well, he goes, no, you better give me my money back. So the guy gave him his $1,800 back. The dealer didn't know that I was listening. So I went up to him and I said, oh, is that an Amazing Fantasy 15? And I said, what's the condition? He said, it's like a 4.0, right? Like a very good comic. And he goes, oh, it's in great condition. So he was trying to sell me a comic that had missing pieces in it. So you have to be really careful. That's why when I purchased comics, I learned a lesson a long time ago. That actually happened to me. I bought Superman number 30, which is the first Mixoplick, one of my favorite characters from when I was a kid, one of the best villains out there that I liked. And they said that it was like a 6.0 fine. I asked if there were any missing pieces or anything like that. They said no. I got it in the mail, and on multiple pages there were pieces cut out of it.
No, I think I remember you telling me this.
Yeah, I was really mad. I called back and I found the guy's phone number, and the person that picked it up was the guy's dad. So he's all, my son did this. He gave you a comic book that had pieces missing. Don't worry, he'll fix it. So the guy calls me back. You spoke to my dad, huh? And I'm like, well, that's the number that I had, but you gave me a comic book that had pieces missing out of it. And he goes, well, what do you want me to do? I'm like, this is not worth that much anymore. I'm all, give me half my money back. I still have the comic, but because of that, I bought like 3 more. So I have like 4 copies of that comic now, in better condition. So
Yeah.
just be careful.
That's why
when you
it's
buy it.
important to have an independent place like CGC to grade it. And I mean, that's like a whole nother topic. But that's why it's important to have it graded so you know what you're getting versus like just trusting whatever the person is telling you. So
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that's
yeah,
really important.
yeah, and we'll get into it later, another really in depth. But yeah, if you're also investing and you want to maximize the potential, it's a good idea to get your comics slab, get them graded and slab, and that way, once they put that 9.2 on it, it's for sure. It's not, you're not eyeballing it. It is a 9.2, and you can sell it as a 9.2. So that's also a good idea. But like I said, we'll go over CGC and what's the other one? PGX.
PGX and CBCS,
Yeah,
those are
we'll
the
go.
3
Yeah, we'll
major.
go over those in a full in depth in another video. But yeah, getting graded is highly recommended.
So let's see here. So what makes a comic valuable? We've gone over some of the key elements. One of them was availability. One of them was popularity, condition, quality restoration, and age. So now let's talk about the next one. The next one would be significance. So what do
Right.
I mean by significance? Well, let's see. Was there a first appearance of the character, or was it a first issue, or maybe there was some sort of major event that occurred in the comic book, or some historical significance. Again, let's take Action Comics #1 again. First of all, it was the first appearance of a character, Superman. And not only that, but that comic is widely considered to be the beginning of the superhero genre. And most consider that book to be the start of the golden age of comics, which is the first of the 4 comic book ages. So significance has a lot to do with the value of a comic book. What other comics have you guys seen out there that may have like a lot of significance attached to it?
Well, and this ties into what Brian was talking about earlier with all the fake issue ones. For this significance, you're gonna have to do your research. You're gonna have to get an overstreet price guide, and you're gonna have to look into it. You're gonna have to Google, and you're gonna have to find out which comics have the significant that something of significance. So I used Incredible Hulk earlier. Incredible Hulk #1 was the first appearance of the Hulk, right, in 1962, and Bruce Banner and Betty and Rick Jones and General Ross. So that's that was, and I think that was the second Marvel comic. I think it went Fantastic Four or modern the Stan Lee Marvel. I think he did Fantastic Four, and then I think he did the Hulk. So that's a pretty significant comic. But there are like 3 or 4 Hulk series that restarted with #1. So you're gonna have to really look at them and be like, okay, there's Incredible Hulk #1 from 2008. Oh, that's trash. There's another #1 from 2012. Okay, that's trash. It's about the issue 1 in 1962. So for this one, you're gonna have to do your research before buying. I'm trying to think of a big significant comic. I guess Fantastic Four 1, right? That's the dawn of the Stan Lee era of Marvel. And that's the Marvel that we all know. Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Hulk, the Avengers, all that stuff. So Fantastic Four 1 is Stan Lee's first new Marvel universe, I guess. That'd be one that I would say is pretty big.
Yeah, exactly. So if that key element is part of the comic book that you're researching, it has the potential to be really valuable, which leads us to our last key element, which is potential. So this is the one key element that's a little bit more difficult to apply, because it's subjective and speculative.
Yeah.
There are, let's see. Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy 15 is the first Spider-Man. Well, several years later, what year was it that Miles Morales came out?
Miles Morales came pretty recently. He's within the last 10 years.
Right, within the last 10 years. Now, I never bought that book, and the reason why I didn't buy it, it's because I was so used to the original Spider-Man, and I felt kind of like I was betraying Peter Parker. No, really. So I didn't buy it. However, now that book is expensive. So when that book first came on the shelf, you could have thought to yourself, well, that has potential, to be something great. And after the cartoon came out, the movie Into the Spider-Verse, yeah, that comic just shot up. And
yeah, I'm looking at that one right now, and it was 2011 Ultimate Fallout 4, and a 9.8 is worth $400 right now.
Yeah, and if they make a live action movie out of Miles Morales, I guarantee you that comic's going to even skyrocket more.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And here's the thing: in that movie, there are other characters that could again be potentially worth more, like the Gwen Stacy Spider-Man character. I think that was What If number 105. That one is going to be up. Can you check that one, John? See what that one's going for.
Yeah, I'll check Spider-Gwen.
I believe it's What If 105.
And then Spider-Man Noir by the Nicolas Cage.
Right.
They're actually bringing him back. There's a new Spider-Man Noir comic. So already they're already starting to see those characters coming back.
Right now, there's a question because Brian and I talked about this a little bit. The difference between potential and hype. Now, hype is totally different. Like with the Green Lantern movie coming out, there was a lot of hype on a character that was already established. But we're talking about the potential of a character becoming big. There's a big difference between the two. And they sound similar, but they're completely different. Not sure if you're understanding it. Am I explaining it the right way, Brian?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, because like the Image, the hype. It was a new company. Oh, look at this huge Image Comics, and had all the top artists from Marvel. They're gonna change the business, and they did change the business. They did, and there was all the hype on the characters they're creating. Now the big red flag that I would have, if I was old enough at the time to realize is that they were all writing and drawing their own comic. Well, they weren't writers, they were artists. So when you read their comics, you read Youngblood written and drawn by Rob Liefeld, it's not good. Like Spawn was written and drawn by McFarlane. It was okay. It looked great. The artwork was amazing. So the big red flag there was like, okay, there's all these hype, this new universe, and all this stuff. Will these characters, will they last? Will they become culturally important? And the answer is no. No, they didn't. If you guys know who Shadowhawk is, no, that was one of the original 7 Image comics. There's other characters like Savage Dragon is more of a cult. He's more of a cult hero. He has a strong cult following. Youngblood is not even published anymore. Wildcats isn't published anymore. So that's hype. That's just hype. Look at this new universe with this. It's going to be awesome. That's hype. Potential is something like, Miles Morales, right? That's we use that example. We'll stick with it. It's this character who took over for Spider-Man in the Ultimate Comics. So he was continuing the series. So Spider-Man didn't end; it just picked up with him. And this is a big one too, is that he was racially diverse. He's mixed Hispanic and Black. So you have the first minority character picking up the role of Spider-Man. So that's potential. That's the difference. You're seeing something here that's like, wait a minute, this is new, but there's something to it. Whereas like the Image was like, it's just new and it's hype and it's all these great artists who are now writing when they're not writers,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's it's hard to distinguish, but there is a difference.
Yep. So let's go over those key elements again of what makes a comic book valuable. So number 1 was availability. Is it rare or is it common? The more rare it is, the more likely that it could be valuable. Okay. Now, popularity. If it's in high demand, it's going to be more valuable. Because if nobody cares about the character, nobody's going to want it. Then we've got condition. Is it restored? Is it complete? How high is the grade? Is it a near mint copy or is it just a basic fair or a good copy? Makes a big difference. The higher the grade, the more valuable it will be. And age has a lot to do with that because the older comics are more difficult to find in higher grades. That's why if you find an extremely high grade Golden Age comic, it will be worth so much more. And another key element was significance. Did it have a first appearance? Was there a major event or a historical significance? And the last key element would be potential. Is there a potential for that character to be mainstream? And if it does, then potentially it could increase the value of that comic book as well. So what do you guys think?
It's a lot of information that goes into this, but you're gonna have to do your homework. You're gonna have to do your homework if you're gonna really buy a comic that's worth something. You're the Google, get an Overstreet, see what the prices are, talk to people. If you can get to a comic shop, ask them. They're going to be more knowledgeable about about what's hot, what's selling, what's what characters are that everyone's into. Don't just buy anything, willy nilly and just think that looks cool. I'm gonna buy it. You know, I love Wolverine. I'm gonna buy his comic and it's gonna be worth a lot of money. No, it's probably not. Um, so yeah, it's not easy. This isn't easy. It's not an easy thing to do. Comics aren't exactly like super mainstream. They're getting there, especially because of the movies, but it's still a hard it's hard. It's hard to buy a comic and then hope that it gets value back, and especially if you can't afford the golden age, silver age comics that are $50,000, 75. Especially if you can't afford that, it is really hard. So do your homework. I don't we don't want you out there spending your money on stuff that just isn't going to do anything for you.
There is something that I didn't mention, but it has to do a little bit about hype. And this is even with the blue chip comic books like Amazing Fantasy 15, the first Spider-Man. When all the Spider-Man movies were coming out, and Amazing Fantasy, like in a CGC 3.5, was selling for $24,000. Now that same comic book is now selling for $18,000 to $19,000. So when there's hype, even with mainstream characters, you can lose a lot of money if you buy it during the hype. I would suggest never to buy a comic when there's a lot of hype about it, regardless of the character. That's a good way to lose a lot of money.
Yeah, and we'll go over in future videos. We'll go over comics that that we think have potential. Mainly, they're going to be Marvel based because of the movies. The movies are affecting the prices of the comics. Like, what'd you say, Patrick?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they are affecting it. So we'll come up with videos later of what comics, that are a little more modern, a little more affordable, that might be worth jumping onto. And Brian, you're gonna say something?
I was gonna say yeah, this is more like for long-term investment. It's not something you just buy it and then wait until unless you know when to sell it and you have no attachment to the comic. But I think I can say for all of us that we do have some attachment to the ones that we collect, and that's why we have them. So it's a long-term thing, right? Like you have to just ride through the hype or wait and more important, do your research. So something different, like we didn't add to the list, but I want to bring it up in case people are thinking about this. Is there, John? You sort of touched on this. What about the like the artist or the writer for a particular comic? That doesn't help at all, right? I mean, it's really more about the story itself. Character.
Yeah, it's and it kind of works like in real life. If there's a super popular artist, his stuff's gonna be worth more. But then when and it's kind of morbid to say, but when they die, that's when the value jumps up. So this actually more goes towards signatures and stuff. Stan Lee used to sign everything under the sun. Patrick probably knows about this. You handed him anything, he would sign it. Didn't even matter. It was DC, whatever, F it, he'll sign it. So for collectors, getting a signature from Stan Lee was really easy. Well, now it's not. He passed away. So now the value of this stuff that he's touched goes up. Now, if you're talking about a comic with an artist, I think this is what Brian meant. Let's talk about an artist, John Buscema. We talked about him the other day. He's a legendary Conan artist for Marvel. So if you want to go back and buy those old Conans, is it the fact that John Buscema drew it? Does it make it more valuable? No, not really, because it's mass produced. It's not an original copy. Like those, that's what makes a difference. If you can get, you bought the actual original art from John Buscema. So no, a writer and artist doesn't really affect a comic. So, for example, Incredible Hulk 340 is a really popular Hulk comic. It was the Gray Hulk fighting Wolverine. It was really popular, and Tom McFarlane drew that issue. and this was pre-Spider-Man Todd McFarlane, before he became, big megastar Todd McFarlane. So when you go back to buy that comic, is it like, oh, Todd McFarlane drew it, therefore it's worth more? No, it's that it was just a cool story that was low print run and everyone jumped on. So no, in short answer, no. A writer, artist on a comic, it doesn't really matter.
By the way, that cover is awesome.
Oh yeah, that's one of the greatest covers ever.
Yeah, it's so awesome that I drew it. Did I show you guys?
Yeah.
And I'm not an artist. I loved it so much I drew it. It may have not have looked good. You're like, did you draw? Is that Superman, dude? That's no.
Tracing paper over the copy pad and traced over it.
I didn't trace over it. Come on.
I'm just kidding, dude. You're like damaging your bug.
All right, cool. Do we have any other questions or?
No, I think we covered everything, and for all the listeners out there, hopefully this helps. And if you need any more specific examples, feel free to go ahead and list them in the comments, and we'll try to get to them. Oh, you know what? We were talking about this earlier. It was a story that I had, and this is just a funny story. Talking about investing, people investing poorly and stuff. When I was working, I was working at Ralph's Grocery right out of high school. So this is 2000, 2001. So I was just a kid, 17, 18. One of my coworkers found out that I read comics, and she came running up to me. She's like, "John, do you read comics?" And I go, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh man, how much is Death of Superman worth?" Superman issue 75. And I go, "Oh, about $20." And her face just drops. And she's like, Are you serious?" And I go, "Yeah, why?" And she's like, "But it's in the bag. The condition's good." And I was like, "Yeah, I know. $20." And she just was like, "I have 3 of them. I thought my kid's college was paid for." And I started to laugh. And it's funny because that comic hits a couple of criteria, right? Historical event, Superman died. It's a popular character everyone loves. Condition was good. She never opened the bag it came in. However, they made way too many of those comics. There are so many out there, like hundreds of thousands, maybe even more. They printed. You can get one anywhere. You can go to any comic store, any convention. They got it. So I was laughing. I mean, it was funny to me. She was pretty sad. And then she goes,
"It's funny to me."
And then she goes, "What about the Return of Superman, the white bag?" And I went, "Oh, that's like $5." And she just stormed off. She turned around and stormed off. And I was laughing so hard. So yeah, that's another example of someone who knew they knew something was up and they jumped on it, and especially because the hype of that. We talked about hype. I mean, that was all over the news. Remember, it was Superman dies on Wednesday. Yeah, it was.
I saw it on the news.
Yeah, and I remember going to the comic shop that I went to normally, and there was a line. There was a line down the street of people just to get that comic. But the hype got to everybody, and they probably printed 1 million copies, like literally probably 1 million copies. So.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier too. That all of the key elements actually have to work together in order to make the comic valuable.
It's tough, man. It's hard. It's like we're saying, it's hard. Do your research.
Yeah, but don't worry about it because we're going to give you some comics that will have potential.
Yeah, we'll help you guys out. So I think we covered it pretty well, guys. I think we can sign off now. Unless there's anything else you want to throw in.
Nope, we're good.
All right. Well, stay tuned. Like I said, any questions, throw it our way in the comments, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. But until then, we'll see you guys next time.